Hi, I'm Erica Larson, presenting my case study. In summary, a student named Lucy, who was an all-state cheerleader, was invited to march in a holiday parade I assume out of state. It says New York. Her mother calculated how much this would cost for her to do, and then went to the principal asking for PTA funds to send to her to this experience. The principal, Mr. Stevens, denied her request, stating that PTA funds should only be used to benefit all students. The mother, Mrs. Bowman, had frequently volunteered to sell tickets at school sporting events, but soon after her request was denied for her daughter, 10 tickets became unaccounted for, and there was a note left saying that they were ripped. And also, the funds related to these tickets, which would have been $50, were short, or they were 10 tickets short, one of the two. Also, there was no $50 bill in the cash from sales, as there should have been based on a conversation that Mr. Stevens had had with a parent, that he'd gotten paid that day and he had paid with a $50 bill. So what I know, there should have been a $50 bill among ticket proceeds, and there was not whenever Mr. Stevens counted the funds. The funds were also $50 short, and or there should have been unused tickets as evidence that they were not sold. The mother who had been selling tickets had recently requested money, and this was denied. Also, the principal denied use of PTA funds when requested. An administrator should only serve as consultant to the PTA, because the PTA is actually in charge of the funds. So what I need to know, where are the tickets and or the money? Where is the $50 bill? Who was designated as the event coordinator for this game night? Um, I would assume that it was Mr. Stevens. He typically took care of all the event coordinator duties as described, but this particular game night was really busy, and so he trusted his parent volunteers to dutifully count money and take care of things without following recommended protocol. So I assume the event coordinator was Mr. Stevens, but it didn't specify this. Also, who counted the money at the end of the shift? There should have been two people counting it together. It just talked about how Mr. Stevens and the security guard counted it on the way to the bank. But I don't know about who actually counted the money with those selling tickets. And why was Mr. Stevens speaking about PTA fund usage? Um, what are the typical practices with the PTA? What role does he normally play? This implies that he maybe does more than just serve as consultant for the PTA. As far as a plan of action, I outline more appropriate procedures on the next slide. Once these are implemented, Mr. Stevens needs to follow through with them and reinforce them. He needs to consider hiring an event coordinator. So he is responsible for procedures, but the event coordinator is actually responsible for securing unused tickets and monetary funds. And so he needs to take responsibility for improving procedures, and then he also needs to make sure that somebody is specifically designated, appropriately designated during games to take care of ticket and money fund responsibilities. And it sounds like this is a little difficult for him to do at times. So he needs to really think about what are the responsibilities of these roles, and are they being fulfilled, and how can we ensure that they're being appropriately or adequately fulfilled. He also needs to avoid getting into business that's not his. Um, Speaking for the PTA is overstepping boundaries based on what we learned in class. So the more appropriate procedures that I recommend are to use two-part or electronic tickets. It's not, it didn't say that these tickets weren't used, but it didn't say that they were in the case study, so I assumed that they weren't. The torn tickets were unaccounted for. They were pre-numbered, it did say that, because Mrs. Bowman stated the specific range of numbers that were torn and were missing. But there should have been ticket stubs, or there should have been evidence of those tickets. And using two-part or electronic tickets would make it less likely that tickets would just disappear. Each ticket seller needs to count funds with the specified event coordinator, which again does not sound like it was clearly delineated. And then after counting funds, each ticket seller needs to complete an actual report based on their ticket sales, called the individual ticket sales report. As stated, all unused ticket inventory should be secured, as should any cash. Um, the event coordinator needs to submit a financial report about the event to Mr. Stevens after the fact for review. We also need clear procedures in place for when funds are requested from the PTA. If these are in place, it would be easy for Mr. Stevens to say, oh, you need to talk to this person. Typically, requests are for these types of things, but again, refer to the person in charge. Proposed plan of action. More information about this. I think it's important that procedural training be given to staff and volunteers before they are allowed to work the games to ensure that they have the knowledge to follow procedures. I think this should occur every year, even if they volunteered in previous years, and then, as stated, before they're allowed to work games. They also need to sign an agreement that they agree to follow procedures, and this signed agreement could serve as documentation that they did complete the training. Procedures need to be kept available for volunteers and staff to access at any time. So they need to be in writing. It could be also, they could also be available online, but in writing. They need to be given copies when they complete the training so they have one on file, and then they also need to be able to access more if they were to lose it. Also, policies or procedures should be provided in a more quick reference format so that they can reference them during games quickly while in action. And then also, if they wanted to reference more depth, then they would have their full, longer procedures. And then, as I stated on the PTA, it needs to be specified who to be contacted. There needs to be more specific procedures specified from the PTA as well. To promote student success or consider what is best for all students, when we clearly communicate best practice, which in defining more specific procedures and clearly communicating them, this communicates best practice. And especially when this is visible, whenever there are extra copies in the office or on the website, whenever there are the abbreviated quick reference copies during games, this shows that we expect procedures to be followed and that they're in place. And then whenever these are enforced, this shows that we expect people to do the right thing. Students need to learn this in life. It also shows that we're treating student resources with care and that we're respectful with them. Um, it shows that reflects our attitude about students as well. They are worthy of the best we can give them, and we're not going to let anybody cheat their resources, and we're going to treat their resources carefully. Also, whenever we require ethical behavior, and whenever we're fair in carrying out expectations, this shows that justice will occur, and so this teaches students justice, and this may mean investigating situations that are difficult. And I think the way that this happens is equally an important learning experience for students. Also, reinforcing ethical, fair expectations further reinforces 1 and 2 because, again, we're enforcing the high expectations and we are also treating resources carefully. As far as thoughts, feelings, and values, um, you know, it seems like Mr. Stevens, as the administrator, is in charge of a lot of things. As I stated earlier, he's in charge of general procedures, all administrators would be, but he also appointed himself as event coordinator.